Stephen Booth, head of Britain in the World Project at Policy Exchange, joins me now. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, good evening.
Yeah, good evening to you. Let's just talk about cheese, first of all. Are the Japanese actually keen to buy our Stilton cheese, or what's Liz Truss up to here?
Well, I think there is sort of an important precedent here in terms of, I think, what this is part of is the UK is trying to get sort of greater market access for certain products, and Stilton being one of them. I think there's also a symbolic element here because large parts of this deal will build upon and be very similar to the existing EU-Japan trade agreement, which this deal is designed to replace. And I think it would be a good news story certainly for the UK government if we can point to certain products that have gained access that we didn't have access to under the existing EU agreement.
And presumably Liz Truss could stand up in front of the Tory troops if there were to be a Conservative conference, which of course there isn't this year, apart from one online. But maybe she'll use Zoom to tell us of her wonderful stand on behalf of Stilton cheese. Just tell us a bit more about what sort of products the UK is hoping to sell to Japan, because presumably they're pretty limited.
Well, no, I mean, obviously Japan is a major economy. And I think, as I said before, I think that the key thing to remember about this deal is it's actually a large part of the motivation for this is to preserve existing trade flows and investment flows, some of which have been opened up by the existing EU-Japan deal, which we're currently party to, but will cease to be applying to the UK when the transition Brexit period ends on the 1st of January 2021. So we're sort of seeking to consolidate that and replicate that. But I think and one of the things that is interesting about this is that Japan, rather than simply copying and pasting the existing EU agreement, Japan did want a new deal to look at areas where the EU and Japan had failed to kind of reach agreements. So things which are actually quite important to the UK. So looking at services exports, digital trade, e-commerce, and investment, all areas where the UK is traditionally strong, and also where we've taken a more liberal approach to that of the sort of the centre of gravity in the European Union. So there are opportunities here as well.
And we're hearing positive signals from each side. Are we close to a deal? And how much could a deal like that be worth to the British economy?
Well, I think there's a couple of things in there. I think clearly both sides do want to reach a deal soon. The aim is to have something in place to replace the EU deal, which will end the end of the year. So there's a hard deadline, if you like, for that. I think there's also a big strategic element to this for the UK and Japan. The Japan deal for the UK is an important stepping stone towards joining the so-called CPTPP, otherwise known as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it includes 11 countries around the Pacific Rim, including other targets for the UK, such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and so on. And this is something that Policy Exchange championed the UK joining back in 2018, and it's something that the UK has identified as a sort of strategic priority. But I think regarding the other part of your question in terms of the economic value, as I said, this is largely about consolidating existing trade flows. And I think it's also important to remember that no FTA or no individual trade agreement is likely to be transformative to UK GDP. And one of the things that people like to do is compare, the projected costs of Brexit to any single FTA, the Japan one being one of them. And I think the problem with that is you're not comparing like for like, because ultimately EU membership requires an unparalleled level of economic, but also political and legal integration, which means pooling a huge amount or losing a huge amount of sovereignty, which is ultimately what the primary motivation why many people voted to leave the European Union. So I think it's very difficult to compare like for like when you're looking at the economic impacts of leaving the single market and customs union of the European Union.
Is there a potential figure, though, on what this could be worth if we get a decent deal?
Well, I think that the GDP impact is likely to be relatively small. Okay. And as I say, I think that's something that will be common across all trade agreements.
But during the Brexit campaign, many people talked up the prospects of simply rolling a whole load of trade deals which we currently have as members of the EU and saying, well, we can just replicate them and have them as separate UK deals with all these 50 or so countries with which the EU does have free trade deals. If we can get an agreement with the Japanese, could that be a form of template or set a precedent at least for more trade deals around the world?
Well, we're in the process of doing just that, and some of the deals are like you described. They are simply a sort of a rollover of the existing EU agreement, so very close to the existing EU agreements we were already party to. Others, like the Japan agreement, are actually, and because of the insistence of the Japanese, are aiming to go further in some areas. I think much of this deal will look like the existing EU deal on things like trading goods, but on services is something where we can go further. And I think the important aspect of this, as I said before, is actually looking to be part of not just bilateral agreements, but these larger agreements such as the CPTPP, which does involve, as I said, 11 countries in the sort of Indo-Pacific region. And then I think the value of that is again, it's not just economic, but it's also strategic, because having left a big major economic club in the European Union, I think the UK gaining access to others sends a positive signal about Britain's place in the world.
But yet, the EU will still be probably our most important trading partner. And just briefly, I mean, these negotiations have been going on. We keep hearing a few positive signs and then some more negative signs. Do you think that Britain is going to manage to get a trade deal with the EU in time?
Well, I think it still hangs in the balance, and I think, as you've mentioned, this process has tended to drag on, and I think that the likelihood is we won't know until the very last moment if a deal is possible. I think that on the positive side of things, it does appear that both sides are making progress on some of the difficult issues. I think the EU understands that the UK won't be able to sort of submit to the jurisdiction of the EU's court, for example, but there are still major sticking points on fishing and the EU's demands on the state aid regime for the UK. But again, on there, I think that compromises are possible, but ultimately it all comes down to the sort of the last political wrangling, which I think we're beginning to reach that point. But I think we're not going to find a solution until the autumn.
OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Stephen Booth from Policy Exchange. Great to have you with us here on Times Radio.